Last thing my wife ever asked me was whether the roses in the front yard would bloom again that spring. She'd been in the hospital for 11 days by then. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer moves faster than anyone tells you it will, and by the time the doctors started using words like comfort measures, I'd already stopped sleeping in our bed. I slept in the recliner by the window so I could hear her breathing. She died on a Tuesday morning in March, with her hand in mine and the television on low in the corner. Some morning news program neither of us was watching. Her name was Carol. We were married for 31 years. I sold her jewelry 6 weeks after the funeral. Not all of it. I kept her wedding ring and the small pearl earrings she wore to our daughter's college graduation. But the rest of it I took to a shop on Route 9 and sold for what felt like nothing at the time. The hospital bills had a way of making things feel like nothing. We had insurance, but insurance doesn't cover everything, and the everything it doesn't cover has a way of adding up quietly until one day you're standing in a jewelry shop, holding a velvet tray, and a man with reading glasses is offering you 40% of what the pieces are worth. I took it. I paid what I could. I went home and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. My daughter came by that week. She was 32 then, already 3 years married to a man named Brandon, who sold software for a company downtown, and had never once looked me in the eye for longer than it took to shake my hand. She sat across from me and said the house felt different without Mom, and I agreed with her. And then she mentioned, gently at first, the way she always started difficult things, that she and Brandon had been thinking about their finances. I listened. I was good at listening. They needed help with the down payment. Not a loan, exactly. She was careful about the word loan, more like an investment in their future. A gift, really. She said $30,000, which was most of what I had left in savings after the hospital, after the funeral, after the jewelry shop on Route 9. I gave it to her. She was my daughter. Carol would have done the same. That was the first time. I want you to understand something about the years that followed, because this story doesn't make sense without it. I'm not a man who asks for much. I spent 30 years as a civil engineer for the county, got up early, came home, fixed what needed fixing around the house, coached Little League for 9 seasons, taught my daughter to drive in an empty parking lot at the community college on Sunday mornings. I didn't need applause for any of it. That's not how my generation worked. You did what needed doing, and that was enough. But somewhere along the way, I've thought about this more than I'd like to admit. I became convenient. That's the word that fits. Not loved, not respected, necessary in the specific way a checking account is necessary. You don't think about it much when it's working. You only notice when something changes. The something that changed was my knee. 2 years after Carol died, I had a replacement surgery that went sideways. Infection, then a second surgery, then 3 months of physical therapy that insurance covered about half of. I called my daughter on a Wednesday evening to tell her, not asking for anything, just telling her the way you tell family things. Brandon answered. He said she was busy, and he'd pass along the message. She texted me 2 days later with a heart emoji and a note that said, "Hope you feel better soon, Dad. Let us know if you need anything." I didn't call back to say what I needed. I figured out another way. Here's the part people find hard to believe, and I understand why. When you're 62 years old with a bad knee and a fixed income and a house that needs a new roof, it doesn't look like the beginning of anything. But I'd spent 30 years analyzing the load-bearing structures and drainage systems and soil composition reports, and what that kind of work teaches you, if you pay attention, is that most people only see what's already built. They don't see what the ground can hold. A colleague from the county office had left municipal work years earlier to go into real estate investment. Nothing glamorous, just distressed properties in secondary markets, places that needed work and owners who needed out. He'd been trying to get me involved for a decade. I'd always said I was too busy, too cautious, too tied to the pension and the steady paycheck. After the knee surgery, lying in bed with nowhere to be and nothing to lose that hadn't already been taken, I called him back. I started small. A duplex in a town 40 minutes south that needed the plumbing redone and the windows replaced. I knew how to read a contractor's bid. I knew what things actually cost. I did some of the finish work myself when my knee allowed it, rented both units within a month, used the cash flow to do it again. Then I stopped counting the way you stop counting stairs when climbing them becomes automatic. I'm not going to give you numbers because numbers aren't the point. The point is that over the course of about 5 years, quietly and without telling anyone in my family, I built something real. I kept the county house. I kept the roses in the front yard trimmed the way Carol liked them. I drove the same truck. I didn't buy anything flashy or change anything visible because I wasn't doing it to be seen. I was doing it because the work made sense to me in a way that nothing else had since I lost her. My daughter knew I had some rental properties. I'd mentioned it once over dinner, casually, the way you'd mention a hobby. Brandon had made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and said something about landlords and market speculation that he clearly expected me to take personally. I didn't take it personally. I passed the bread and changed the subject. That dinner was about 2 years before the vacation. The vacation. I have to get there eventually. My daughter called on a Sunday morning in late April. I was on the back porch with coffee, watching a pair of cardinals work over the bird feeder Carol had put up the spring before she got sick. She sounded bright, energized, the way she sounded when she'd already made a decision and was now executing the formality of informing me. She and Brandon were planning a family trip. 10 days in late July, a resort on the South Carolina coast. A place with a pool and a beach shuttle and a restaurant that required reservations. Brandon's parents were coming. His mother and stepfather, who had retired to Hilton Head the year before and apparently knew the area. His sister and her husband were coming. 2 of their couple friends from the neighborhood were coming. I waited. She said they'd love to have me, but... And here was the pause. The specific pause I'd learned to recognize over the years. They'd already worked out the rooms and the budget, and it was complicated, and they didn't want me to feel obligated to join when they knew travel was hard on my knee. I said my knee was fine. She said she knew, but also they'd already blocked out the rooms. I asked how many rooms. She said 4. I did the math out loud, and 4 rooms did not account for me. There was a longer pause this time. Then she said, Brandon felt that, and here she switched into the third person the way she always did when delivering his opinions. Brandon felt that the trip would be more relaxed without, and she hesitated, without having to worry about anyone who wasn't part of the original group dynamic. I said I understood. I said to have a wonderful time. I said I loved her. She said she loved me too, and asked if I needed anything before they left. And I said no, I was fine, and we hung up. I sat on the back porch for a while after that. The Cardinals had moved on. The coffee had gone cold. I want to be clear that what happened next was not a plan I made in anger. I don't operate well in anger. Never have. What I did slowly, over the following 6 weeks, and I did it because an opportunity presented itself and because, when I sat with it long enough, it felt right in a way I trusted. It started because a business contact sent me a listing. I'd been casually interested in coastal hospitality properties for about a year. Not seriously, just watching the market the way you watch weather when you're deciding whether to re-roof. A small boutique inn on the South Carolina coast had come available. Owner was in his late 70s, health complications, no succession plan. The property had 15 rooms, a small restaurant lease, a pool, a pier with boat dock access. It was not a resort in the magazine sense, but it was well maintained. The location was exceptional, and the price reflected an owner who wanted a clean exit more than he wanted top dollar. I drove down on a Thursday with my contact. I walked the property twice. I sat on the pier and looked out at the water for about 20 minutes without saying anything. Then I looked up the name of the resort my daughter had mentioned on the phone. It was 2 miles up the coast. I want to say I felt something dramatic in that moment. I didn't. I felt the same quiet thing I feel when a set of engineering calculations comes out clean, a sense that the numbers are telling you something true if you're willing to listen. I made an offer the following Monday. We closed in 6 weeks. I did not tell my daughter. I did not tell anyone in my family. I told my attorney, my accountant, and my business contact, all of whom are paid specifically to keep my affairs private. I drove back to the property twice before July to meet with the manager I'd retained from the previous owner, a practical woman named Diane who had run the place for 11 years and knew every creak in the floorboards and every name in the reservation book. I did not look up my daughter's reservation. I want that to be understood clearly. I didn't arrange anything. I didn't engineer an encounter. I simply told Diane I'd be coming down in late July to do a proper walkthrough as a new owner, and she suggested the 3rd week of the month, when the property was fully booked and she'd be able to show me how everything ran at capacity. The third week of July, I drove down on a Wednesday morning and arrived around noon. The property was beautiful in summer, the kind of beautiful that catches you a little off guard when you've only seen a place in shoulder season. The hydrangeas along the front walk were fully out. The pier had a family on it with fishing poles. The restaurant smelled like something with garlic and lemon that made me realize I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I was in the small office off the lobby with Diane, going over vendor contracts, when I heard my daughter's voice. It carried the way voices carry in spaces with high ceilings and hardwood floors. She was at the front desk with her husband and another couple. One of the neighborhood friends. I recognized the woman's laugh, and she was asking about early check-in, explaining they'd driven since 6 that morning and the kids were tired. The man at the desk said he'd see what he could do and asked for the name on the reservation. I heard my son-in-law give his name. I stayed where I was. Diane looked at me. I'd told her, without full context, that I had family staying at the property this week, and she'd nodded with the professional discretion of someone who understood that owners sometimes have complicated personal situations. I listened to the check-in process complete. I heard my son-in-law ask about the pool hours. I heard my daughter say something about dinner reservations. I heard their luggage wheels on the floor as they moved toward the elevator. Then I went back to reviewing vendor contracts. I saw her the following morning. I was having coffee on the small terrace off the restaurant, a guest area, but Diane had set me up there for the morning with the week's operational reports. My daughter came around the corner of the building in a cover-up and sunglasses, looking for the path to the beach shuttle, and she stopped when she saw me. The expression on her face went through several versions in quick succession. Surprise, confusion, the specific recalibration that happens when the context you built for a situation turns out to be incomplete. She said, "Dad?" I said, "Good morning." I told her she looked well. I asked if she'd slept okay after the long drive. She said, "What are you doing here?" I told her I was working. I gestured at the reports on the table. I told her I'd been meaning to come down and do a walkthrough since I'd taken over the property in June and that Diane had suggested this week. She said, "Taken over?" I said, "Yes." I told her I'd bought the inn in June. I told her it was a good property, solid bones, and that I was looking forward to doing some work on the restaurant side over the next year. She stood there for a moment in the morning light, and I watched her understand something. Not everything, the full shape of it would take her longer, but something. She said, "You own this place?" I told her I did. She sat down across from me uninvited but welcome. I poured her a cup of coffee from the carafe Diane had left. We sat there together for a while without saying much. The beach shuttle pulled up at the far end of the property, and a family with young children climbed aboard. The hydrangeas moved in the coastal breeze. She asked why I hadn't said anything. I told her the truth, that I'd been building this for a few years now, quietly, and that I'd learned quiet was better than announced, until something was actually solid. I told her the inn was the largest property so far, but not the only one. I told her I was fine financially, that she didn't need to worry about me in that way, that I was actually quite good. She said she hadn't known. I said I knew she hadn't known. We had breakfast together that morning, just the two of us. Brandon came looking for her about halfway through and stopped when he saw me, and I watched him do the same recalibration she had done, faster and less gracefully. He said my name in the tone of a man who is rapidly reassessing a situation. I shook his hand, the way I always had, and I asked if he wanted coffee. He sat down. He drank the coffee. He didn't say much. At one point he said, "So you've been," and then he didn't finish the sentence, and I didn't finish it for him. Brandon's parents came to dinner at the restaurant that evening. His mother was warm and easy to talk with, the way she'd always been on the occasions we'd been in the same place. His stepfather and I talked about the coastal real estate market for about 40 minutes, and he asked several good questions that I was happy to answer. Brandon watched this happen from across the table with an expression I couldn't quite read, and didn't try to. My daughter sat next to me at dinner. She refilled my water glass once before I could reach for it myself. It was a small thing. I noticed it. On the third day, I drove back home. I had work to get to, and I'd seen what I needed to see about the property. Diane was more than capable of handling the week without me hovering. Before I left, my daughter walked me to my truck. She hugged me for longer than she had in years. The kind of hug that means something, that has some acknowledgement in it without either person having to say what's being acknowledged. She said she was sorry. Not for anything specific. I don't think she was ready for specific yet, but in the general way that can be the beginning of something more particular later. I told her there was nothing to be sorry for. I meant it, mostly. I told her I loved her and to enjoy the rest of the trip, and to send me a photo of the pier at sunset if she got a chance. She did. It came to my phone that Friday evening, a good shot, the light doing something warm and particular on the water the way coastal light does in late July. I put it in the same folder on my phone, where I keep photos of Carol's roses. I've thought a lot since then about what it means to spend years being overlooked by people who should see you clearly. I don't think my daughter ever stopped loving me. I think she got absorbed in her marriage, in the rhythms that marriage creates, in the version of me that was useful as a quiet background presence, and less considered as a full person with his own interior life, his own capabilities, his own ongoing story. That's not an excuse, but it's closer to the truth than saying she was simply cruel, because she wasn't simply cruel, and I'd be doing her a disservice to frame it that way. What she was, for a period of years, was inattentive. And what I was, for that same period of years, was too quiet about who I was becoming. I changed my estate plan that fall, not out of punishment. I want that understood clearly. I changed it because Carol and I had set it up when our circumstances were different, and good planning means updating documents when circumstances change. The new plan is more structured, includes some charitable provisions Carol would have appreciated, and creates a framework for how the properties will be managed in trust rather than simply transferred. My daughter will still be provided for, but provision and assumption are different things, and I wanted the document to reflect that I'd thought carefully about all of it, rather than leaving things that was simply the default. My attorney said it was one of the more thoughtful estate plans he'd seen in a while. I told him that was the goal. It's been almost 2 years since that July. My daughter calls more often now. Real calls, not texts with heart emojis. Calls where we talk for an hour about things that matter, and some things that don't. She's asked about the properties, genuinely interested, and I've told her what I'm comfortable telling, which is more than I used to tell. Brandon shook my hand differently at Thanksgiving last year. Still the same handshake, technically, same duration, but something had shifted in it. A small recalibration that I noticed and accepted without comment. I went back to the inn in October, shoulder season, when the hydrangeas had gone woody and the pier was mostly empty. I sat on the same terrace where my daughter had found me that morning, drank coffee, read through Diane's quarterly report, which was solid. The Cardinal feeder in my backyard was empty when I got home. I filled it that evening and stood at the kitchen window waiting, and after a while one came back. The morning my daughter found me on that terrace, coffee in hand, operational reports on the table, I watched something shift in her face that I'd been waiting years to see. Not satisfaction, not vindication, but recognition. She finally saw me as a full person, not a background figure, not a resource. Me. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to get to a moment like that, and I don't think it comes from wanting it. I think it comes from deciding, quietly, to live as though your own life matters, and then doing the work that follows from that decision, day after day, without asking anyone to notice. What Carol taught me in 31 years of marriage and in the way she faced the end of her life was that character isn't something you perform for an audience. It's the thing you do when no one's watching. When I was sitting in that recliner by the hospital window, holding her hand in the dark, there was no one there to see it. When I sold her jewelry to pay those bills and didn't make a single phone call to complain about it, no one got to witness that either. That kind of integrity. The kind that costs you something real and asks for nothing back is the only kind I've ever trusted. The years I spent building the properties, quietly, without announcing it to my daughter or to Brandon, weren't about secrecy for its own sake. They were about learning something I should have understood earlier, that intelligence isn't just knowing things. It's knowing how to read a situation clearly, without letting hurt or bitterness distort what you see. I looked at that listing on the South Carolina coast, and I saw what was actually there. Good bones, fair price, an owner who wanted out, a location that made sense. I didn't see it through the lens of what my son-in-law had said on the phone. I didn't let that conversation make me stupid about a good opportunity. That separation between the emotional reality and the practical one took me years to develop. I'm glad I did. And the persistence. Lord, the persistence. A bad knee at 62. Selling jewelry to cover hospital bills. Watching your daughter pass along your messages through a man who couldn't be bothered to look you in the eye. None of that is dramatic when it's happening. It's just Tuesday. It's just the particular weight of a life that has asked more of you than you expected. The only answer I know is to keep going anyway. Not out of stubbornness, not to prove anything to anyone, but because the alternative is to stop, and stopping felt like a betrayal of everything Carol and I had built together. Brandon shook my hand differently at Thanksgiving. My daughter calls now, real calls. The cardinal came back to the feeder. None of that happened because I planned it. It happened because I kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept being the kind of man I could recognize in the mirror. The rest followed from that, the way things tend to when you give them enough time and enough honesty. I'm 64 years old. The roses in the front yard came back this spring, same as always.